歡迎收睇傳媒對焦。加中關係近年陷入歷史低谷，再經歷3年嘅新冠疫情，更加係雪上加霜。雙邊貿易可以話係舉步維艱，受影響嘅當然係兩國嘅金融、生產、服務、運輸等行業嘅主管同埋工作人員，交易量大跌，前景係咪唔樂觀呢？目前雖然疫情已經全面減退，但係加中兩國又捲入咗地緣政治、通貨膨脹、經濟低迷等多種僵局裏面，幾時先可以走出陰霾，恢復兩國貿易嘅積極互動，促進雙邊利益呢？
加拿大係最早承認並且同中華人民共和國建立外交關係嘅西方國家之一。50幾年嚟，兩國無論民間交往還是商貿往來都密切頻繁。不過，新冠疫情全球爆發嘅2020年，即係加中建立外交關係50週年之際，雙邊關係就因為2018年12月加拿大應美國引導要求拘押中國華為財務總監孟晚舟而陷入歷史冰點。外界一直喺度關注隨之而嚟持續3年嘅疫情係咪又雪上加霜，令到加中兩國嘅商界合作同交流步履維艱。
I think tourism, of course, cultural industries, anything where you might have been doing, say, live shows or things. And ideologically, it's also gotten much more challenging on the culture side. And also services. So not if you're doing financial services and you have operations in China, that might be okay. But if you were doing, capital markets or legal or accounting based on deals, deal volume is way down. And that's not just for the pandemic. Part of it is the pandemic. We have a mission that is more and better business between Canada and China. And so certainly how we help more business happen changed during the pandemic because of the travel restrictions. So no delegations, no members traveling and meeting with our offices in China. There was no business development, really, unless you had a team on the ground already. So we had to adapt and work on capacity building in Canada, which was always a problem. A lot of companies aren't ready to go to China, so we were able to use that to help do more training and help companies that way, as well as to help them resolve some of the problems they had with China. Like some had team members who needed to go back.
加中貿易理事會目前擁有超過300間喺中國市場活躍同有意開拓中國市場嘅加拿大企業會員，涉及嘅領域包括農業、食品、飲品、能源、製造、法律、金融服務、教育、醫療保健業。同時喺中國仲擁有日益增加嘅對中加貿易感興趣嘅中國企業會員。根據加中貿易理事會一項統計顯示，截至2021年，中國已經成為加拿大第2大經濟合作伙伴，僅次於美國。不過當年進行嘅另一個調查就發現，受訪企業並唔樂觀。
In China, like one of the things we did is we helped to put people's staff on our payroll in China. So a company maybe isn't ready to go set up a whole operation, but they want somebody in market to talk to customers, to make sure their IP is not being stolen. Just having that general interaction is important. And so we definitely added some members that used that service. And this is important because we did some surveying, and we found that in 2021, people told us that overall, Canadian companies were, the news wasn't good. Less profitable, less optimistic, very negative. However, if you separated out the companies with operations or people on the ground, those were more profitable, more optimistic, more likely to expand. And the problem is that when you compare us with the Americans, the Europeans, the Brits, we were falling behind all of those competitor countries. This is bad. This is bad for Canada's global competitiveness if we are lagging. And those countries tend to have companies that made investments earlier or have bigger operations on the ground in China. So I think Canada was really impacted by the last, 4 years now, because in 2019, with the 3 M's, as we call it, to Meng Wanzhou and the 2 Michaels, many business people said, I'm not going to travel until this is resolved. So you had that year, and then 3 more years during COVID. And so if you were relying on your vice president of sales to go to China 4 times a year to meet customers, or your partners at a law firm going to discuss deals, then you didn't do anything over the last 4 years. So that's that was a big issue, I think, for Canada.
而家新冠疫情喺全球消退之際，加中兩國之間複雜而微妙嘅關係，又不可避免咁籠罩喺地緣政治、通脹高企、經濟低迷等陰影底下。尤其是聯邦政府跟隨美國採取對華強硬立場，涉及台海局勢、俄羅斯入侵烏克蘭、外國政府干預大選等外交內政嘅敏感領域，多方都關注跟住落嚟到底會發生乜嘢呢？加拿大經濟前景，特別係企業發展何去何從呢？
At the end of the 20th Party Congress, Xi Jinping closed his speech by saying there's a lot of rough seas and high winds in the world. So you have essentially the geopolitical environment, which is really unstable. And the Ukraine-Russia situation has made that even worse. And then you have Canada-China relations, which is a frozen block of ice. So it was frozen before the 3Ms was resolved. And when that was resolved, a big cultural difference between Canada and China became very apparent. The Chinese side said, okay, that's done. What's next, right? Much as we were saying that now in China, people don't talk about COVID. COVID is done, behind us. What's next? What's in the future? The Canadian side, which many Western countries are much more concerned about, black and white, right and wrong, truth with a capital T, as they called it. The Canadian side froze their block of ice even colder. And so it's been really hard to get things restarted. Below that, though, you have some rivers flowing in the water. So business will always get done. People-to-people relations will help to carry that along. And that's one of the roles we play at CCBC. When the relationship is bad, we can often help keep things going. Now, our perspective is that Canada's relationship with China should make sure, it should be good for both, but it definitely has to be good for Canada. So what's good for Canada, right? Canada making sure its laws are followed on its own soil is, of course, paramount, right? So election interference, there's no patience in Canada for that.
高思瑜就認為加拿大嘅繁榮有賴同盡可能多嘅國家，尤其是中國進行對話、接觸同有效嘅溝通，喺多個領域有責任保持競爭力。
I've heard 3 things in my time at CCBC that will lower the temperature of a room really fast if you're having a conversation. One is, can I bring my own labor? I had a meeting with a Chinese investor, and on the Canadian side, we're very enthusiastic deal makers. And the minute the CEO said, what about labor? Can I bring my own? Nothing, right? There's no patience for that. Same thing with freedom of the press and free elections. So that's a non-starter. But also what's in Canada's best interests is that we are able to compete fairly in a market like China. And what we can see is that some of our allies, the US specifically, says to its allies, don't do business with China, China's bad, China is this, that. And yet, the US is stealing our market share in many products. So in pet food, we lost half of our market share last year, where we are not able to export to China because of avian flu concerns. Those same concerns exist in the US, but the US increased its sales by 265%. So we need to fight for that. Some of our factories that are making pet food in Canada have had to stop producing and move the production down to the US so that they can keep selling to that fast-growing market. So that's worth fighting for on the Canadian side. That's one of the few positive signs we have seen in surveys. And if you look at the thousands of Tim Hortons stores or the Canada Goose brand that's doing so well, I think that's a really positive sign. So last year, nobody thought exports would increase because, of course, China's consumption capability was really dampened. But we had another record year of exports, $28.7 billion by StatsCan data. So that's good. That's a positive sign. That means even without trying very hard, there's still some momentum. What happens if we try harder? What happens if we fight for our market access against the Americans or our other allies.
加中貿易理事會委託進行嘅一項研究顯示，對華出口為加拿大創造嘅價值，至少係實際出口額嘅2.2倍。2011到2020年出口中國商品增長一半，令到經濟貿易往來成為加中關係嘅強勁紐帶，同埋最具潛力嘅發展契機。雖然內外環境存在重重困難，甚至營運風險，加中貿易理事會仲係喺疫情期間持續舉辦線上線下嘅活動，為加中嘅政商界搭建平台。最新活動包括喺舊年11月喺上海第5屆中國國際出口貿易博覽會上舉辦咗加拿大展商對接會，12月邀請本國駐華大使梅善林喺多倫多舉辦加中貿易圓桌會談。今年以嚟就教育、移民、旅遊點樣促進經貿發展，舉辦咗多項研討會等等，更加計劃秋季喺北京恢復實體舉辦加中貿易年度大會。而喺外交層面，雖然目前暫時睇唔到加中關係明顯解凍，不過高思瑜就認為澳洲嘅經驗值得借鑑。
You know, Australia is a really good example to look at. So Australia has had very similar issues with China, including exports being restricted for what we would consider unfair reasons. Australia has taken a fairly hard line on many issues related to China. But recently, the Australian government decided to start talking again. They haven't actually changed any of their policies. The policies are still pretty hard line. And yet, things are moving. The talking part is really important. And of any of the countries we might look at as examples, Australia is probably the closest to Canada in terms of being kind of a middle power, smaller economy. And so, it would be helpful, I think, for us to look at what Australia has done to recently improve its relationship with China in pursuit of its own interests.
外界關注幾時加中啟動恢復雙邊會談之際，加中貿易理事會就認為同中國嘅接觸需要透過多條渠道，包括同中方分享點解對某啲議題睇法唔同嘅各種渠道。一方面要喺加拿大關切嘅問題上推行自己嘅主張，另一方面要促進本國持續繁榮，例如喺好似教育、旅遊、環境呢類冇明顯爭議嘅領域上積極合作，創造同把握機遇。
各位如果想重溫以上節目內容嘅話呢，可以去到本台嘅網站，點擊節目重溫裡面嘅傳媒對焦就可以啦。再會。